So, in line with all of the mind blowing cost estimates of the Green New Deal, one of the things defenders like Ocasio Cortez have started doing is invoking this economic theory called modern monetary theory. And I think it's worth delving into a little bit without getting too into the weeds, because it is sort of invoked to try to take away that as a criticism of the Green New Deal. And I just want to give you a flavor for how the people behind modern monetary theory will talk about its implications. So this is Professor Stephanie Kelton, who's very visible in these debates. And she has a piece where she says, here's the good news. Anything that is technically feasible is financially affordable. Just pause on that for a second because my jaw hit the floor and I read that. But anything that is technically feasible is financially affordable, and it won't be a drag on the economy. The federal government can spend money on public priorities without raising revenue. In other words, Congress can pass any budget it chooses, and our government already pays for everything by creating new money. And like the essentially what the modern monetary theory argues, they'll grant that there's a view understanding of economists, and most people I think grasp this, the idea that if the government prints too much money, we're going to have inflation, which can be one of the most destructive things in an economy. And the modern monetary theory proponents will grant that that theoretically can happen, but they say it's so remote as to be meaningless, that essentially we have at our disposal the ability to have a free lunch by printing up trillions upon trillions of dollars. And like, if you think about the fundamental economic challenge that human beings face, it's how do we produce? That is, how do we take inputs and make them more valuable by rearranging them? And if you just look at businesses, most businesses get that wrong, right? Like they don't make profits because they're not actually making things that are more valuable. But if, according to the modern monetary theory, the problem is it's effectively effortless for us to create valuable things if the government prints enough money. And like without getting into the economic technicalities of it, I mean, the essential fact is that when you're printing money, you're not actually creating new resources. And what ends up happening is that you just have more money chasing the same resources, bidding up prices. And that's really the root of inflation and hyperinflation. And the main thing I wanted to highlight, and this is one of the few times where I woke up in the middle of the night and had an idea, and then in the morning it still seemed like a good point. That there's this essential similarity between modern monetary theory and the Green New Deal that it's used to defend, and that's both of them are threatening the stability of a fundamental system. So hyperinflation is what destroys a monetary system, which is the fundamental system making it possible for us to have an advanced division of labor economy where we're able to actually coordinate our efforts. And as we're seeing in Venezuela, when that breaks down, you basically wipe out the ability to have any sort of economy. It's not just that things are getting more expensive, it's that you don't have the kind of coordination that allows you to have an economy, let alone economic progress. And then the other fundamental system in an economy, of course, is the energy system, which is, you always point out, Alex, is the industry that powers every other industry. And that what the Green New Deal would be doing is weakening the stability of the grid. And I mean, we are also, as we talked about last week, seeing that in Venezuela, where the grid basically collapsed and they had blackouts for days. And really the only difference here is that the Venezuelan government wrecked its grid through neglect, whereas the Green New Deal would be doing it as a matter of deliberate policy.
Yeah, it's like it's sabotage. So it's like accidental fire versus arson. That's Ocasio Cortez is like an arsonist, but I guess who says she's going to build you an even better house? Yeah, it's interesting those two fundamental systems being attacked. Interestingly, we had a decade where those two fundamental systems were suffering mightily, and it was in the public awareness. It was in public awareness, and that was the 1970s, where you had a tremendous instability of energy supply, particularly fuel supply for mobility, because of the oil crisis, which had a couple of different causes, maybe more than a couple. And then you had serious inflation and what people called stagflation. It's interesting that it's probably not coincidental that those aren't on people's minds, because they're 40 plus years ago now. So it feels like, oh, well, that can't happen. That was in the past. And then what happens is you get new variations on old fallacies. And, in this case, modern monetary theory, we need a new name for that, because that's a ridiculous name. And that's obviously trying to obscure something. And so whatever it is, I mean, this is the kind of free lunch theory that just doesn't recognize the nature of reality, as you mentioned, the nature of economics, which is that you're trying to take your existing state of resources and raw materials, and then to grow it into a state of more resources. And just think about a desert island. If you just want to think about this kind of simply, like you're on a desert island and you have some money system and you have a printing press, and it could even be a sophisticated desert island, but basically nobody on the island knows how to give you power with solar, wind, and storage. Like, they just don't know how to do that. And it just takes up so many resources to even try, that anyone who tries to do it starts to bankrupt themselves. And then you just think, like, there's something wrong with the process. The process does not use resources efficiently. And therefore, the more you try to engage in that process, the more you're going to consume those resources, and you're going to turn them from valuable to less valuable. You're going to end up, generating a whole bunch of solar panels and batteries that really can't do that much. And you could have used the wealth for something else, and the time that went into it for something else. So the fact that you can then print as much as you want on the printing press doesn't change the fact that the the process for solar and wind and storage is really, really inefficient. And so that's when we're talking about money, we need to be thinking about what's the resource efficiency of the different productive or destructive policies taking place. And because there are so many of them and there's so much money, it's easy to just think, oh, it's all infinite, but it's definitely not infinite. And you find that out when you make really, really dumb decisions. But money is not wealth / resources. It's a tool for exchanging them. And if you don't recognize the underlying reality that money is trying to help you deal with, then you're going to make very irrational and unjust decisions.